Alrighty, welcome back to Cookie Pocket, episode 92. Today, we're going to be discussing David Lynch's Dune, but first, we have another guest this season, a returning guest, in fact. Would you care to introduce yourself, sir?
This is Dylan, previously of Bargain Binge. I don't do podcasts anymore, but, I had to come running. I heard Dune was being talked about. I flew all the way back from the Southwest just to do this. We got to get this done.
All right. We appreciate you flying in for Dune of all films.
Hey, guys. Yeah. Fear is the mind killer, etc. Whatever.
Into our undisclosed recording location.
Yes.
We all meet up on Arrakis.
But yeah, so Dune, a film in a book with a notoriously complicated plot. In fact, instead of me discussing the plot of Dune, I think this could be kind of fun. Mitchell, I know you haven't seen the newer version of Dune, and I know you haven't read the book. Would you care to describe the plot of Dune for us, Mitchell?
This is cruel and unjust punishment.
It's all about the spice, Zach. It's all about the spice, okay? There are warring factions that want the spice, and there's also a god, and there's native people that are spiritual. And that's it.
I mean, as far as the Lynch film is concerned, that is pretty good.
That covers it.
Okay. But we've done enough beating around the bush. We'll start with overall thoughts, as we always do. What did you guys generally think of David Lynch's Dune?
Maybe I'll save Mitchell from having to jump in twice before any of us goes in ourselves. I landed on a 2 out of 5, which I think is where all of us did, but I had heard a lot of bad things about this, and just knowing that Zach really likes David Lynch and Dune, it concerned me that Zach would give this a 2, because then I'm thinking, oh no, I don't like these two things as much as Zach does, so surely this is going to be an unmitigated disaster. I wouldn't go that far. I don't think it's a travesty. I don't think there are certainly memorable aspects of it, and it's a discussable film, which is good for our sakes. But, I think weirdly what bothered me the most, and I'm sure we'll get into the runtime and studio limitations and all that, but I think what bothered me more is the performers. I think a lot of them were very wooden and kind of, instead of grasping where the story is going, I think they sort of replaced that with harsh mannerisms that didn't necessarily fit their characters and hamstrung themselves. I thought Kyle MacLachlan was pretty solid, but I didn't think the others totally knew what they were doing, if that makes sense. But Sting seemed to be having a lot of fun, so good for him, I guess. I liked Brian Eno's contribution to the score was awesome, and obviously a lot of the costumes and some of the sets are neat, but it just doesn't come together, and I don't know why, because I think it's not too different in terms of the events depicted for like the first 90-100 minutes to Denis part 1, which I really liked. So I don't know, 2 out of 5, but not terrible. Interesting in some ways. Well,
if it's so discussable, why won't David Lynch talk about it?
That's a fair point.
Should call him right
I
now.
mean, yeah, I have him on the line, actually. No, just kidding. But at the same time, this is a movie that is good that I don't like, and a movie that is bad that I do like. You see, it's a very conflicted movie. There's so much good about it that is completely negated by all of the bad about it, which is most of it in the end. This is what Lynch directed instead of Jedi, and it's, I don't really think it was ever going to work out with him doing these big studio films, and clearly it didn't. He, like I said, he doesn't talk about it, but it still is definitely, it has his touches, although it's much more faint than his other movies. It's putting Dune through a Lynch lens, which is interesting, but he also didn't care about Dune, so like all of those things are so conflicting. Yeah, it mostly comes down to the production design about what I like, and like some of the auteur touches of his. But not a great movie. It's mostly boring. So yeah, like you said, a 2 out of 5 if I were to rank it.
Yeah, not having any experience basically. I mean, I watched the remake, and I thought fairly good things about that. Watched it like I passively watched it, not like I was going to review it, so that's why I didn't like say I watched it. But yeah, so I had like a vague impression of what was going on. My dad loves this movie to an extent for whatever reason, and yeah, I have to agree with Dylan. I mean, it's so boring, and like I Christian mentioned the costume design, and I thought that was really cool, and there's just a lot of really good ideas, and you can tell right away, not literally knowing nothing from the book, you can tell right away that it's an adaptation, and that it's a very hard sell adaptation for a viewer that did not care going in. And I feel like you really had to have had prior investment to like it. It's almost like, it's like a lot of people that criticize Star Wars in general, especially the original trilogy, are like, there's just not an investment in the universe, and the more you get invested in the universe, the more you care about the original films, and more you're going to enjoy them and find things to like about them. Maybe that's the same way with Dune, just on a much grander scale, not to mention having, is what I know anyway about Lynchian directing style, like all those really weird just decisions and weird lines, and just like the cinematography and the fading and the narration and all that crap is just really, I don't know. It seems like a universe that doesn't really need that. I don't know. I'm not trying to speak too much outside of my knowledge, but I felt the whole time that it was an adaptation that needed some different type of treatment in order to address the main plot better, and I just felt like it was a collection of scenes that had interesting ideas about a universe I didn't care about at all and had no reason to really ever care about. But other than that, I mean, there's enjoyable moments. A lot of like the extracting of the spice and everything, and even a lot of the effects, besides like the shields and stuff, I guess, were pretty good. I enjoyed the effects, actually. I didn't think they were like absolute poop, but I did think that they were like very tolerable, and like they fit the universe, and it was like a believable universe in general, I guess. But you know, that's as much credit as I can give it.
Yeah.
Well, isn't spice the worm poop? So it's kind of all poop. If you think about it. Kind of is. And I'd be remiss, I should mention, I have the theatrical poster for this in my house. My wife loves this movie.
Wow. Nice.
I should also mention, of our three, main cookie pocketeers, I'm the big Lynch fan. Mitchell and Christian, correct me if I'm wrong here, but I think this is your first Lynch film? Okay.
Yeah.
What the hell?
I have first done my due diligence in introducing you to a better Lynch film.
How many seasons
first.
are you on now?
Well, this is our fourth.
We're on our fourth.
I considered doing Eraserhead, but thought, nah, Dune. That's a better choice.
You picked this, Zach?
I did. This is my selection.
Okay. I question a lot of your decisions now.
But I will agree with you, though, Mitchell, that I think Lynch is just... He's totally wrong for this material, and I think he would even agree with that down the line. The few times he has spoken on this film, he's seemed very befuddled as to why Dino De Laurentiis picked him for Dune, and apparently before this he directed The Elephant Man, which was not a very unusual film. There's a few little scenes that are a little bizarre, but it's very much quite a normal David Lynch film. And based on that, Dino decided this man must make the next Star Wars.
Okay.
It's a strange leap in judgment, and he feels all wrong for the material. Because David Lynch makes films about like specific people and their personal weird little problems. he doesn't usually make films about huge world-ending issues, and
No.
if he does, he focuses on specific people within that.
Well,
Like, go ahead, Dylan.
I like what the setting is weird for Lynch, right? Because
Yeah.
he's usually just working. He likes to work within the confines of America and the context of
Yes.
like modern America. So bringing it out into the stars and making it this big allegorical, like big think stuff doesn't really work, because really David Lynch's like themes are very simple.
Mm-hmm. And I think the thing he taps into most in this, and the thing he enjoys working with most, is the Harkonnens. Because in David Lynch movies, there's a consistent thing where he's really fascinated by the idea of almost cartoonishly evil people.
Yeah.
And I think the Harkonnens are like his science fiction take on that.
Oh, yeah.
But everything else, all of these characters look so bored, just standing around on these huge sets, staring into the middle distance as their internal monologue goes on and on and on. And it's, I mentioned to Dylan before we started recording, the first time I watched this, I had just read the book, and so despite being a little embarrassed for David Lynch while I watched it, I was still invested and kind of entertained. But on this rewatch, I was struck by how dull so much of it is. I mean, once you get past kind of the visual splendor of it, there's not a lot to grip onto here. But Mitchell, you are right that a lot of, I think our parents' generation, a lot of them do really like this film. I think because it's just kind of a memorable big blockbuster of the summer of like their junior year of high school.
Yeah, there were
toys.
There's toys of the movie.
There's a very 80s specific iconography to this film that I think a lot of people latch onto,
Yeah.
but the story isn't really anything to write home about, at least not as adapted in this film.
Yeah, I play with my Baron Harkonnen and my Barbie and the kiss.
With the, I think Jay from Red Letter Media calls him Baron Fartbag, and that's never seemed more appropriate than in this film.
He does fart.
He does. But yeah, so this is known as it has a reputation as like a huge disaster of a movie, and I think that was only compounded by the release of the newer Dune adaptation 2 years ago.
And Jodorowsky's Dune as well.
Yes, yeah, which we might talk about a little bit more a little bit later. But I want to ask the question, what do we think this movie does well? Is there anything that we think this film does better than the more recent adaptation of Dune?
It's definitely it's more psychedelic, which is I think important to the Dune, because spice, it's really a druggy, heady sort of source material to be working with, and Villeneuve is way more straightforward than that, but the production design and Lynch's odd touches add to the funky, spiced out feel, and I think that's definitely an improvement based on source material.
I definitely think there's
Go ahead.
Is Christian okay? Okay, I hope Christian's okay. I think there's a big budget difference, and I think that there is somewhat of a reliance on like minimal, like technically advanced effects, and a little bit more reliance on practicals, I guess. I mean, I don't know. There's a groundedness of it, even though there is like a psychedelic air to it, and like the very subtle like dreamy sequences and the heavy-handed voiceover and internal monologues and everything, I think are like contribute to that, and also the theme recurring. And we've had like this is our third film, I think. I don't know what order. I guess we're in the right order now. Of a theme that keeps showing up over and over again. And this, I think, we might talk about this, but I think it really works here, honestly. I'm not really that tired of it. I think it's got low enough beats and everything. But the theme I like a lot, and I think, yeah, the groundedness and the I guess the originality of the production, because especially in like making sci-fi movies now, there's got to be more and more influence, like whether it's subliminal or intentional, from other sci-fi films that have tried to attempt the same thing over and over again. So you could be like, oh, that kind of looks like a modern Star Trek maybe, or a modern Star Wars, another modern Star Wars or something like that. So yeah.
I think that's a fair point.
80s all the way.
Yeah, and I'll echo what Mitchell was saying, because I know my dad also has like some affection for this film. He stopped short of saying that it was great or anything, but he said it does interesting things or something like that, and he really likes the book. So
There you go.
that's something. I guess I liked certain performances, but not because I thought they were great. Like, how do I explain this? Sean Young as Chani, I feel like she's very convinced of her acting acumen in this movie. Gosh, I sound so mean right now. But there's just like a total disconnect to me. This is how I read it. Between what it is she's going for and what shows up on her face and what comes out of her mouth. But I really think it works. Instead of like forcing some sort of like especially hacked like culture difference where like Sean Young like pretends to be indigenous or something like that. It feels more like there's like a level of social awkwardness instead of that, which I thought worked, and maybe in a similar way to Blade Runner. I don't know. Maybe I just like her. I'm not sure. But and then gosh, what's his face? And I don't know. The rest of the cast also just made me realize how, at least this is a take outside of the film, how many good actors there are working today. I think just because if you line up this cast next to the Villeneuve cast, I think you pretty quickly realize how strong the advantage is to the newer cast. At least in my opinion.
Objection, sir.
Yeah, I don't agree with that.
Okay.
Oh my god.
Although I think
God.
Dylan and I are maybe coming from the perspective of having seen more Lynch films, where this cast, members of this cast, are much better used.
Well, talking about Chani, I don't like Zendaya very much, even as Chani. Well, we haven't seen much of her, but it's a toss-up there for me, you know?
Yeah. Well, I was prepared to... No, look, going down this rabbit hole.
Sure.
I was prepared to hate Timothée Chalamet, but I always just found him vaguely annoying, but I just thought he was great in part one.
Yeah, I had the same experience.
I got over that pretty quickly.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know. I think, gosh, what's his face? Whoever plays Rabin or Raban or however the heck you say it.
He plays the villain in Robert Altman's Popeye movie. I forget that actor's name though.
Well, and anyway, I was just like, wow, Dave Bautista is so much better than this. It's just what I was thinking. So, I don't know. Maybe this is an unfair comparison.
Yeah, I'm surprised you have any kind of note about Sean Young's Chani in this film, because she's barely a character in the Lynch version. Like, she's barely there. Because, I mean, a little bit of behind-the-scenes production stuff, but halfway working through this movie, David Lynch was told, hey, hurry up, by the executives. And so the whole back half of the film just becomes like an endless montage. And I think a lot of the Paul Chani romance, which is going to be a focus in the upcoming Dune Part 2 from Villeneuve, kind of gets cut out of that. I will kind of agree with Dylan, I think, that as much as I think that the more recent Dune is a much better movie than Lynch's Dune, I do think that in terms of the look and feel of the movie, it takes out or dilutes a lot of the weirdness that I think makes Dune interesting. Dylan, you mentioned Jodorowsky's Dune, which, if it had ever been made, would have been a much, much weirder version of Dune.
It would have never been made. People don't like to acknowledge that because of the documentary. It was blowing it up and everything, but that was never going to happen in any universe.
Oh, yeah, no. I mean, if it had stayed in his like original version, maybe, but by the point he was like, oh, it's going to be 14 hours, that never would have happened.
Sure.
But I do think that there's a very weird element to just the world of Dune that this captures a lot better than the more recent one.
Yes.
And I think that partially comes from Lynch's focus on details. I think like the little background extras in the scene where the Emperor of Space meets the Navigator. And there's like a bunch of people dressed in outfits made out of body bags, and they're there to like clean up the slime that the navigators leave behind. And there's such a focus on like, all right, there's all these weird creatures that inhabit this world. What would need to exist in this world to make this an actual habitable place for them?
Yeah.
And the vast sets as well. I don't understand what anything on the Harkonnens' home planet Giedi Prime is meant to do or mean in this movie, but it feels like it does mean something, except for the bit where Thufir Hawat is presented with the cat that he has to milk to get his antidote for the poison they've dosed him with. That is not in the book. And I don't even hate that he has to do that, but I hate that there's just a rat gaff taped to the cat. That like little things like that kind of take me out of it, because it's all right, that's gaff tape. Like that does not feel like an alien apparatus, but everything else, right down to like the cow hanging upside down in the hallway, and the bit where the Baron is just spinning around the room while Jack Nance twists a couple of knobs. I don't get it. I don't get what they're doing it, but I feel like they get why they're doing it. And I don't think the new version has anything like that, where Giedi Prime and Caladan are just planets where it rains, and Arrakis is just a planet where it doesn't. So that's my big compliment to the film. Mitchell, though, you mentioned the score, and Christian, you mentioned Brian Eno in your kind of original thoughts. So I want to talk about that a bit more, because even amongst people who don't like this movie, I think it's often pretty fondly remembered for the score. So what did you guys think of the score? And I guess if we're going to continue to talk about the newer version, how do you think it compares to the Hans Zimmer score for the new film?
The Hans Zimmer one is like, it's far more generic, to be honest. I think it's far more generic, and it's harder to remember. I mean, I can tell it's Hans Zimmer, which is good, but that's about it. I mean, I know it's like I was already mentioning about the having repetitious score. I think it's just, if you're going to hammer down on the same like few themes, then I feel like it makes, in a lot of ways, it makes more sense to hammer down with the same like theme over and over again, the same score. And I think that's why it kind of works here, because it's kind of like an impending, it's giving you a sense of like there's something impending, or that there's some grandiose thing that's about to happen. And even if you don't actually feel that impact as much by the end, I still feel like it builds enough anticipation where it's like, okay, this is supposed to be an important scene to the plot, so it helps you concentrate on what's supposed to be important too as a viewer, in case you like looked away and saw a bird outside or something, and you're like, oh wait, I'm supposed to be paying attention. So I think for those things it works really well. I think with Hans Zimmer it's like, ooh, something's happening, ooh, tension, and that's it. That's like, there's no like boom, impending, God, Arrakis, that kind of feeling.
Okay.
I'm sure everyone's expecting me to take this golden opportunity to dunk on Hans Zimmer again, but I have a slightly more nuanced take than that. I will give him some credit, because a while ago I read an article about what he did to achieve the sounds for his score, and from what I understand, he like built instruments, and the way that he incorporates like throat singing and whatever, to me is original and exceptional in its own way. What doesn't work is when you crank the volume up to 13 and you do that for like 70% of the movie. It gets pretty tiresome, and then what was once an original application of music becomes very quickly generic and non-specific, as Mitchell points out. I was ready to dislike Toto. I did not. I could have done without the electric guitar personally, because I think It was fine. It didn't bother me as much as I thought it would, but it's still when you have this orchestral setting that's very nice and effective. I think maybe this is my own genre prejudice, but I think it puts you in a category, and then when you put in like a reverb guitar, electric guitar, it automatically places you in a slightly more specific box, and it just reminds me that this is like a relic of the 80s, and you know, and that doesn't make it inherently bad, but it does make it a little bit more distracting and less timeless to me than, say, a John Williams score. So there you go.
Oh, you had to pull that
Okay.
word.
I like both of them. I like both scores for their own reasons. Hans Zimmer is definitely one of the leading generals in the loudness war, so it definitely is too loud at certain points. But I think it works great. I love the Sardaukar chant section of the score. That's my favorite scene from the new movie, is the Sardaukar. That's a really good moment in the score. Also, I like it. That's all I had to say. It's easy to dismiss Zimmer because he's created the current landscape of scoring. Really, like so much of Hollywood is trying to repeat him, and so it just kind of sounds generic in the end. But I feel like he does still put in the work, and I do like the Toto score. I do like the Toto score a lot. I like the guitar. You don't get things like that anymore. You don't get wild decisions, and that really adds to the whole mishmash feel of the movie. The Toto score is like another element that just feels like it's on some other planet. Like they're all these things are coming together and making the weirdest thing that could possibly have happened, really, and the music adds to that, and I appreciate it for that purpose.
Okay. Yeah, actually, since you mentioned the Sardaukar, I think I'll just point out, of the many things that the Lynch version kind of botches, I think maybe they're one of the most notable. Like in Dune, they're these specialized martial arts warriors, and in the Lynch version, they're hazmat stormtroopers that throw people a lot. So if there's plenty of things that the film underwhelmingly adapts, but I think that is one of the most notable. But in terms of the score, while I do think that the Zimmer score works in the newer adaptation for what it's going for, I'll agree with you, Mitchell, that I think the Zimmer score is kind of like a blanket of thrumming ambient noise over the whole film, and occasionally a new instrument pops up, or it gets louder, or it gets softer, but it's so much less distinct to me than the Toto score, and I think this is the only film score that they ever did. But I really love the Toto score. There was a period in, I think, like my freshman or sophomore year of college, where whenever I was studying, I just listened to the Toto score on like a loop. This is when I was really into Dune and really excited for the new film that was coming out, or was meant to come out that fall. I think it got pushed back a year at that point.
Oh no.
I will say that I kind of dislike the electric guitars in a couple places. I think when the score is being used in like a dark moment or an ominous moment, and the score comes in with that recurring beat, down, now, 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 like when they're attacking the Atreides stronghold during the first half of the film. I love the electric guitars there because it feels like they're interrupting kind of the orchestral half, and it feels like a conflict, similar to what we're seeing on screen. When they're used in a more like triumphant connotation, though, that's when I do feel it starts to get a little corny. Like in the worm riding scene. I think as much as that's a very important scene in the story, I think that's honestly one of the worst scenes in the Dune version, in the Lynch version.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Because the effects really don't hold up. I think they're some of the ropiest effects in the movie.
Bad.
The score is in full like Bon Jovi mode with the electric guitars, and it just feels so rushed, and in the novel, at least, there's so much build up to this moment of, can Muad'Dib ride the worm? And this moment is going to be what determines whether or not he's able to effectively lead the Fremen. And in the Lynch version, it just kind of happens because we just fade it out, and I guess he has to ride the worm now, and then he does, and then they don't say it in the Lynch version, but they wage a jihad against the invaders.
That's my favorite part, is that he wages jihad off screen because Paul Atreides just disappears. That's such an important thing. It is like you can't even say like the synopsis of the movie without like the story without mentioning that, and it's just completely skipped over.
Yeah. Islam is really important to Dune.
Yes.
Which is a weird sentence to say, but it is. It's very important to the source material. And the 84 version seems very afraid of acknowledging that, to the extent that all of the Fremen who in the book are very clearly meant to be like Bedouin or Islamic, they're all white in the Lynch version. Every last one of them. There are no non-white people on the planet Arrakis.
Yeah, it's the planet of Twin Peaks.
Yes,
Washington.
it is. And it's a shame because I like some of the actors in the Fremen tribe. Who plays the leader? Who goes on to play Big Ed on Twin Peaks?
I had it up. I took it down. It's Big Ed, you know.
He's great. Even though he's more fun on Twin Peaks, but yeah, it's a drawback as the Lynch version is filled with drawbacks. But okay, kind of a final point I wanted to talk about before we segue into a kind of our wrap-up thoughts, or any other thoughts, is the elephant in the room, I think, when you discuss all science fiction in the 1980s. Virginia Madsen, when she was interviewed about this film a few years afterward, said that the producers were sure that this was going to be a financial success because they were making Star Wars for adults. So my general question for you guys is, do you think that need to one-up Star Wars or compare itself to Star Wars, do you think that hurt the film? And if so, how? Anyone can begin.
Yeah, Christian or Christian
Okay,
Christian
sure.
can go first,
Fine,
or Dylan. I don't know.
Well, yes, but it's not about Star Wars. Like, that's not why. It's the same thing as what we see now. It's maybe the very beginnings of oversaturation, or that it was made by that demand rather than because somebody had like a really good vision for Dune. Like the same reason that we're all tired of like undercooked superhero films, because I don't know. I don't think you can blame Star Wars' success for David Lynch's Dune's lack thereof. And I think you would have to mention, I'll be the first one to fess up, that George Lucas stole plenty from Dune to support his work, his story beats, and his world building in Star Wars. So I mean, I also think maybe they're just overestimating the intelligence and endurance of the adult audience member, and maybe our reception of this as boring means its intelligence doesn't work in place of creating something entertaining. You know, I don't know. So yes, but it's always a little more complicated, and also you can find similar examples of this over time, and it's not because Star Wars was this unbeatable beast. It's just, you know, it's what the studios want, I guess.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's definitely a case of mismanagement from production. It doesn't help that everything in the 80s was being sold as Star Wars, but better this time, I promise. But starting from the groundwork, see, yes, Dune is the basis of Star Wars, so pretty good idea to go back to the source material, pretty much, like, in a way, that's what they're doing. Dredging that up to make into a movie makes sense. But then Jodorowsky or Lynch as a director for that doesn't make any sense. That's a major misstep. And then they put the limitation that it has to be 2.5 hours or less. You can't tell the story of Dune very easily in that amount of time, which is why the new one is better just because it has more time to interpret such a long story, and it's just part 1, part 2. I mean, they could have even done that, broken it, planned for sequels, but that didn't exist back then so much. They weren't doing so much of the we're going to make sequels to this. I guess that's something Star Wars did pretty early on too. And then just not letting Lynch do anything at all when actually making it. Like a bunch of his stuff stays in, of course. Like, you can't completely pull the director out back then, at least. Now they can. The studios make sure that they can, and that's why they shoot on green screen, and so they can swap everything out. And I mean, I can go on about that, but back then, they were on a set and everything, so they couldn't pull everything of Lynch out about it, but they definitely hated everything Lynch about it because they realized this isn't marketable. So I'd really like to know what, like, a director's cut of this would look like, but that's never going to happen, of course. But yeah, it's all studio mismanagement. Star Wars can't be blamed.
Yeah, I think it's interesting you mentioned splitting it into 2 parts, because apparently when Lynch was told, we'd like you to make Dune, at first he thought that Dino had said June, and he spent like a week looking for a novel called June. And then once he was told, no, Dune, because he'd never heard of it before, he wrote a screenplay in 2 parts that was going to be 2 movies, and he was told, no, you can't do that. So I think studio meddling is definitely part of what's to blame here. But Mitchell, what do you think?
Yeah, I think Christian and Dylan, you kind of already summarized this, but I think having Lucas doing his world building in A New Hope, and we've talked about A New Hope before, obviously, and we're kind of just, some of it's going like, okay, it's planned ahead versus, is he just going along with it, like making up stuff as people ask him questions? The purple lightsaber. There's a lot of questions, about Star Wars that can easily be answered if you just ask George Lucas, and he'll give you an answer. So, I don't think David Lynch cares. He doesn't give a hoot about anything about Dune. He's like, just read the book, kind of thing, And I think that's the standoffishness and and just like saying it's an adaptation that needed more time or needed 2 parts, like Dylan said. I think there's really no other way of going around it. It feels like to a Dune layman, but yeah, I think they're just 2 different franchises. The inspiration is much more at a surface level, possibly like production design or just deriving from the same usual story, just putting it in a sci-fi setting with the hero's journey and everything. I think all that's kind of coming from previous sources, original sources, not as much like, oh, Star Wars did it, so we're going to do it type of thing, or vice versa, I guess. But like Christian said, there's some pretty staunch parallels, like certain scenes and character dynamics and stuff that are like ripped directly from many things, so including Dune. So it kind of goes both ways, but it's not a thing where it's like it ruined it or anything, or it's significantly detrimental.
Yeah, I think I'm going to talk about Heaven's Gate for a brief amount of time because I watched it last night and I think it's relevant. I think Dune is less a victim of Star Wars and more a victim of an enormous dynamic change that happened in Hollywood at around this point.
Yes.
It's not partially the 70s anymore. Due to the film Heaven's Gate, which was made by Michael Cimino, who directed The Deer Hunter. It was this incredibly expensive film that made approximately nothing, and was a huge flop and killed United Artists. And partially due to that and a bunch of other flops, there was a shift in priorities in film studios, where they decided that creative people spent too much money and spent too long doing things. So now uncreative people who are in charge of the numbers are going to be the ones who decide what gets made and who makes it, and they'll be smart and they won't lose money. And I find it amusing that not 5 years later came Dune, a product of the uncreative people managing the studio and picking people to make this movie, picking proven successes to make a movie that will be a success based on a popular source material. And it's still an enormous failure. Yeah, I don't think the problem here is we want to make a movie like Star Wars. I think the problem is we want to make a movie that's as successful as Star Wars without knowing or caring about the source material at all. And I think it's... I don't know. Maybe David Lynch is just a better actor than I think he is, but I've heard like radio interviews from the 80s right before this movie came out, when they were doing the big build-up for it. Oh, David Lynch, come on and talk to us about Dune. And he's talking about how he's currently writing scripts for the second movie and developing a script for the third movie, and they're going to make it a trilogy. And he seems kind of excited about it, but I do think just he's... Obviously, those didn't end up happening, and he's had this tragic falling out with the film since it was released. But he just... I feel bad for him because he's a filmmaker who was incredibly successful and received all this critical acclaim, and people went, well, you're successful. Surely you can make a successful movie out of our successful book that you've never heard of before. And he ends up plopped in there, even though he already turned down Return of the Jedi. I don't know what about Dune appealed to him. Maybe they just parked a dump truck full of money in front of his house.
It's probably money.
But yeah, it's a baffling movie.
Was it normal to plan out like sequels back then? Like I said that I was talking about it my ass, but like, are there other examples of that around the time? Because the fact that Lynch was like planning on more scripts is interesting. Because I always thought like sequels, even at that time, were just like, oh, let's make the first one, but again, there wasn't too much planning. That's like a more current thing.
Yeah, part of that might have been because, also strangely, Frank Herbert was pretty heavily involved in the making of this movie. Which you would have thought at some point he would have gone, what are you doing to my book? But he was pretty involved in it. And from a very early point, he had always said that the first 3 books in the Dune series, Dune, Dune Messiah, and Children of Dune, are effectively all one story. So that might have been a thing where he was talking to Lynch about that, and Lynch decided, well, surely this one will be successful. Let me write down some notes. What are we going to do in the second one? So maybe that's just an exaggeration. Maybe he wasn't writing a full-on screenplay. But there's one interview with like a radio station I've heard where like they're both calling in. Frank Herbert and David Lynch are calling in about the movie back before everything was done on like a Comic-Con press junket. And he talks about the film for like half an hour and writing the scripts. And then they go, okay, David, we're going to continue our interview with Frank Herbert, but we know you're hard at work, so we're going to let you sign off. And he hangs up, and then Frank Herbert just subtly trash talks David Lynch's script for like 20 more minutes.
That's a far shot away from making celebrities play like Truth or Dare in the BuzzFeed studios or whatever. Do you like this Korean candy? Do you, Marlon Brando?
Yeah, I hope our discussion though has indicated that this is. I think it's at least a movie worth watching, at least once, or reading about it to some extent, because I think it is really interesting, but it's fascinating to consider a world where this was a huge success, and what does David Lynch's career look like after that? Would he have continued to sell out, as he put it, or would he at some point have gone, forget it, I'm making Blue Velvet? Who knows? It's a big, very notable question mark in the history of Hollywood. But yeah, any final thoughts on the film before we move on to the rundown? Anything we didn't discuss?
Well, just to dunk on a specific thing.
Oh boy.
Harkonnen looks like Aunt Petunia, bro. Like, come on. How did they think that was going
Baron
to work?
Harkonnen? Uh-oh. We lost Christian. Well, I personally quite like the look of Baron Harkonnen.
It's so disgusting. It's
Yeah.
It's that's like the most Lynch thing in the movie is Baron Harkonnen. He is a Lynch villain. He is Dennis Hopper in Blue Velvet. He is Robert Loggia in Lost Highway. He's the absolutely unhinged, pure evil character that's just a cartoon. And the look is fittingly cartoonish along with that, where he's just rotting in his own skin. It's disgusting.
Yeah. He's one of my favorite performances in the whole film.
We have him back.
We do have
Christian, we were
Okay, I just wanna
discussing Baron
clarify.
Harkonnen in your absence. Would you care to conclude your
Yes.
thoughts?
Yes, if you can still hear me.
Yeah.
I think
Yes.
the costume is fine. I just think when he floats, it looks terrible. It looks so
Oh, okay.
bad. That's it.
Okay, we thought you were
looks
talking
a little
about
silly.
the general character design. I will kind of agree with you that in the book, the point is that Baron Harkonnen is so morbidly obese that he can't support his own weight, and he needs this device to help him move around. And so in the book, he just barely floats above the floor. And I think in the Villeneuve adaptation, they carry that to the extent that occasionally he like rises up as like an intimidation play. I will agree with you that sometimes it's a little silly in this how quickly he moves around, where he is flying more than he's floating.
Yeah.
I think sometimes it works, and I think Toto's score really helps with that. Particularly the moment where he first floats out of his chair, he like slaps his stomach and then floats up and basks in the oily grease of his horrible home planet. That moment's scored so well, and also I forget that actor's name, but he plays it with such like insanity that I really buy him being like a dangerous character, and it helps that he pulls out a guy's heart plug immediately after that, so you really buy kind of his perversion. Also, he's a definite link between this film and Star Wars, because he played the original version of Jabba the Hutt in the deleted scene from A New Hope.
Oh my god.
He can't
before
stop
Jabba
being
was a
fat
slug.
villains.
Yes.
The Harkonnens between the two adaptations, since we've been talking so much about Villeneuve, it's just so interesting because the way that they're played in both films is so different, and I feel like so much of what makes those movies different can be viewed specifically through the Harkonnens and the villains, because Villeneuve's like clean, untouched aesthetic with everything, and then Lynch's Harkonnens look like they live in a janitor's closet. It looks like a high-tech janitor's closet.
Yeah.
That's what I would hope that the year like 10,000 looks like anyway. And they still have cats too.
They do. They still have cats. Actually, there's a lot of additional animals in this movie, where the Atreides have a lot of pugs, and the Harkonnens have cats, which that's another like Lynch symbolism thing, where it's like, is it just as simple as dogs and cats fight, or is there like an additional element there where all the dogs are pugs? Is that meant to be like a royalty thing?
Because they're so inbred and horrifying.
It all makes sense.
Maybe. Yeah. I will. I think the Harkonnens in this film, they work for this version of Dune. I cannot imagine this version of the Harkonnens in the Villeneuve version.
That'd be hilarious.
I think a great example of it is Piter, who is not technically a Harkonnen, but he's their mentat. And in this film, you get Brad Dourif with his enormous eyebrows and huge hair and these enormous like hand gestures at everything. And in the Villeneuve adaptation, you have Bess Malkian and his very kind of like sleek, quick, snake-like version of the character. I think they're really a great point of comparison between the two movies and what the two visions look like. Mitchell, though, what were you going to say about the Harkonnens before Christian came back?
I was just going to say, that floating fat man, pretty epic character design. I think I really have to agree with the I don't know. Honestly, I know this is like a train that's gone past, but I like to have dreams at night where I did take the Lynch train when everyone else did. And I think I like the oddity of it, and like I think you were mentioning when you're mentioning, Zach, like it's so weird that it's unbelievable but believable at the same time, like something that you can't relate to at all, something that's so alien that you wouldn't really be able to comprehend would be a real thing. And I think there's a lot of moments in this, especially with the production design, where it really does come across, and I can see that this is a completely different universe. This is a different way of doing things. It doesn't feel like it's supposed to be representing any particular place or like any certain struggle in humanity's history or something. So I think that otherworldliness of it is kind of like the one thing that kept me going the whole time, including with the Harkonnens specifically. But I think in general, that's like the one thing I can say I really enjoyed, but mostly from a conceptual standpoint, like this would be cool if this was done better perspective.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think I mentioned this at the beginning. I think the individual people and the processes are what Lynch finds so interesting about Dune. To the extent that there are full characters who in the book are much more important, but in this just show up to explain how a specific thing works and then are never in the movie again. Like Max von Sydow, who his character Kynes in the book is a very important character because he's kind of the initial link between the Atreides and the Fremen, and he's part of why Paul is later able to meet up with the Fremen, and his wife is a Fremen, and in this he shows up, explains how the still suits work. There's a later scene where the Baron says, cut open his water packets and leave him out in the desert, and then that's the last you see of this great actor for the entire movie. And there's a lot of things like that, where it's like, well, we have to explain how this works, because I find this a really interesting idea. But does it matter to the plot? Well, no, I just find it a really interesting idea. But yeah, I think we got stuck in the weeds long enough.
I do want to say I agree. At least watch it once. Just don't do it sober, and don't interpret that in any illegal way. I'm completely expunged of any sort of responsibility from saying that. Do something legal, like jankum. I don't know.
You heard it here, folks. Dylan is expunged from any legal consequences. Okie doke. So without further ado, let's move on then to the rundown. Our longest running segment on Cookie Pocket. Mitchell, would you care to explain the rundown?
Oh, Christian can't run away. I'm going to float towards him so fast. No. Yeah. Tear out his heart thingy. So yeah, a minute of Christian getting absolutely destroyed by the three of us. Just saying things that he has to rate. And you should know this is the 92nd freaking time we're doing this, so please learn the segment already, audience. Anyway, Zach will go first, then Dylan, then me, and we'll rotate.
Okay, and let's hope that Christian's connection doesn't mess this up. Okie doke. So, Christian, we have 1 minute for the rundown in 3.
Sorry, what's the order we're going in?
Oh, good point.
Zach, Dylan, Mitchell.
Okay. All right, in 3, 2, 1. Arrakis, Dune, Desert Planet.
3 out of 5.
Straight to the camera address.
3 out of 5.
Score by Toto.
2 out of 5.
Sandstorms.
2 out of 5.
Giant space-bending scrotum. Monster.
3 out of 5.
Production design pugs.
3 out of 5.
Internal monologue.
4 out of 5.
Polygon fight.
2 out of 5.
Big barfing baby statue.
2 out of 5.
Stained red lips.
3 out of 5.
Sandworms.
4 out of 5.
Yelling at it.
3 out of 5.
Walk without rhythm.
2 out of 5.
David Lynch cameo.
2 out of 5.
The spice must flow.
3 out of 5.
Screen tear transition.
3 out of 5.
What's in the box?
3 out of 5.
Poison tooth.
4 out of 5.
The voice.
4 out of 5.
Milking a smooth little cat.
Oh, stop.
No. We'll never know.
Yep.
'Tis the nature of the
Just
rundown.
leaving me
Indeed.
milking my cat over here. That's fine.
Yep. Yeah. For the rest of time.
Wow. That was
Seems like
definitely
the
one to end on.
optimal stopping point. Yeah.
Alrighty. Well, thank you, Dylan, for joining us in our discussion of
Thank you.
David
Pleasure
Lynch's
to be
Dune.
here. Like I said, I hear Dune. I'm there.
Alrighty. Is there anything you'd care to plug before we close today?
Support your local video store if you have one. I've been going to Beyond Video here in Baltimore. It's great, non-profit. I just watched Bad Lieutenant, Protocol New Orleans, and Dagon this weekend from their library. Watching things on discs is so nice, and getting to watch all those bonus features, it's really a valuable thing. And
Amen.
it's cutting through the clutter of streaming, because it's like, you go there, you pick out the stuff, you take it home, you watch it, or you don't, you take it back. The rhythm of it is so much more healthy for my brain. I haven't been streaming anything. I feel so much better. So check out your local video place and donate if whatever their structure is, do whatever that is.
It's awesome. I envy you.
Okay, and Christian, I think you're next up to host. Would you care to preview our next film, which we've already recorded, a certain drama about returning from war?
Oh, yes. Thank you for the very subtle hint, Zach.
I forgot too.
So, next time we will have already discussed a film called The Best Years of Our Lives, directed by William Wyler, concerning soldiers' return to home after World War II and the sort of impossible adjustment that comes with that. So, William Wyler, a mammoth of human filmmaking, and lots to discuss. So, hope you'll be there to listen.
A mammoth of human filmmaking versus what filmmaking, Christian?
As opposed to a human of mammoth filmmaking.
Thank you.
There it is.
Alrighty, well,
It's about the feelings, Zach. Come on.
join us next time for our discussion on the best years of our lives. Until then, check out Dune, or maybe don't. The choice is up to you. Goodbye and good night.